That's scary. Well, thank you. Deb, are there any additions or adjustments to the agenda?
Yes, at the very end, I'd like to go ahead and add elections, seeing how we have one coming up in a week and a half, but just to give you a little breakdown of some new changes that we will be doing, and to get a little listing of my election workers.
Okay, that's it?
Yep.
Sign-in sheet? You're
I already
taking
got
care
that
of it?
done for you guys.
And at this point, I'd like to welcome the group in front of you, but also the people who are out in front of us, and ask if there are any public comments. Okay, let's see. Meeting rules. Please turn off your cell phones. In case of a fire, we have 3 emergency exits located in the back of the gym, in the side of gym, and out the front door. All parties for each hearing will need to adhere to their allotted time frame. The hearings are being recorded. Be sure to speak distinctly and state your name for the record. All appellants and assessor exhibits are considered public documents and will be attached and considered incorporated in the minutes as such, with the understanding the board has the right to continue their hearing to another date to allow time to fully review. Please give copies of all exhibits being presented to the clerk of the board at the time of being presented. We will incorporate a 3-minute break between the hearings to give everyone a chance to move around. And for any of you who don't know me, my name is Donald Hunt, and I'm chairing this. Thank you. Let's see, we will call this, you're behind me here.
Mhm.
Where am
Number 3, I would start.
I? Okay, I will ask the clerk of the board to verify the audio tape recorder is on.
And it is, because we heard, and I get the thumbs up.
Today is July 28th, 2022. The current time is 5:34 p.m. We're holding this hearing at the Coventry Community Center to hear property tax grievances of Paul Cutting and Michelle McManus and others who will be participating in the hearing. The property in question is 64 Coventry Bridge Road, parcel number 0TH07001.
Yep.
Following BCA. The following BCA members are present, and I ask that they stand and state your name and remain standing for your oath to be administered by the clerk. And I assume that includes me. Oh, you want to start far end? Stand, state your name. All right. And let's see, state your name
And stay standing.
and what?
Stay standing for the.
Stay standing.
Yeah.
Anita Allen.
Pat Sloan. Richard Lucia.
Donald Hunt.
Deb Tangway?
Now it's your turn, Sherry. Or is he included?
Yep, both of them.
Dave Yell.
Sherry Bradley. So I'll go ahead and I'll give them their oaths.
Okay.
Okay, so if I can have everyone go ahead and raise your right hand, please. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will well and truly hear and determine all matters at issue between taxpayers and assessors submitted for my decision. So help me God, or under the pains and penalties of perjury, 32 VSA 4405. I'll come around to have you go ahead and sign this, so you may go ahead and be seated.
Shall I continue while you're doing that, Deb? Okay, I'm going to ask the appellants and their representatives who are speaking on behalf of the appellants to please stand, state your name, and stay standing for the oath.
So that'll be Paul.
Paul. State your name, Paul.
Paul Cuddy.
Okay. You don't do the oath first.
Nope, we're doing both together.
Okay, I ask the assessor and their representatives who are speaking on their behalf to please stand, state your name, and stay standing for the oath.
Matthew Krajewski, representing the assessor's office.
William Krajewski, representing the assessor's office.
Thank you.
Okay, then if I can have you three, go ahead and raise your right hand. Under the pains and penalties of perjury, do you solemnly swear that the evidence you give in the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? 12 BSA 5810.
I do.
Okay, I'll come around and I'll have you sign those. We'll let them sign.
Okay.
This one.
If there are any BCA members who need to recuse themselves from this hearing due to a conflict of interest, then I'd ask you to do so at this time.
Do you consider a conflict of interest?
It probably should have to be like related or some kind of, like family relation, or if you're currently like in a contract with him to purchase a home or something of that effect.
In that case, we will begin hearing from the evidence. And I'd ask the assessor to give a brief introduction, simply establishing how the assessor determined the value of the property and provide the necessary background for this case. And I give you up to 5 minutes to do so. Are you working in tandem, or
He's working by himself.
Matthew's working by himself? Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, so as stated, the property in question is owned by Paul Cutting and Michelle McManus, located at 64 Covered Bridge Road, property ID 0TH07001. The 2022 assessment on the property is $67,700. The property consists of a 2,173 square foot home originally built in 1880. It has been gutted and is currently unlivable. There are no finished bathrooms, bedrooms, or kitchen in place. The exterior of the home is relatively worn and dated. The home is graded C average and is considered to be in fair condition. There is an additional construction depreciation attributed to the structure of 50%. This is to compensate for there being a lack of finish to the home. There is an attached garage as well to the home. It is located in R5 or more of a residential average designated neighborhood on 0.41 acres. The grievance request was granted. The assessment was lowered from $87,900 to its current $67,700 based on an increase to that under construction percentage, as I had described. Equity analysis. The subject property needs to be looked at its entirety when determining the fair market value. It is important to remember that a townwide reappraisal has not been done since 2021. The most appropriate method when determining the value of a residential property is a sales comparison approach to value. When analyzing any market sales that have taken place recently within the last 3 years, the assessor then must apply the current town CLA to those comparable sales in order to ensure equity and fairness. Everybody is basically being assessed at 100% of market value, technically 99%. So we do ultimately have to look at the comparable properties at 99% of their value. Fair market value can best be described as the value determined by a marketplace and facilitated by a willing buyer and a willing seller. It is appropriate to consider sales dating back 3 years of the current appraisal date of April 1st, 2022. Specific market analysis for this property. When analyzing this specific subject property, the most appropriate comparisons are other properties that are sold with minimal to no interior and exterior finish. The town of Coventry is a small community, so there is a limited number of direct sales comparisons that can be extracted from within. Other Northeast Kingdom communities may contain similar situations of sale properties in need of full renovations. Individual adjustments can then be made to the 3 comparables to ensure the analysis is indeed fair. The assessor was able to identify 1 comparison from within Coventry and 2 comparisons from outside of the community. Comparable sale number 1 is the comparable that we found from within the town of Coventry. It's 329 Main Street, sold August 5th of 2021 for $73,000. I'm basically going to summarize here. This property, although it contained a level of finish at time of sale, we felt that overall, and certainly all due respect, if anybody either is involved with this property or knows the specific owners, it's a relatively worn out home. It's in a location that has a level of traffic to it, certainly, versus the Helen's property that we're talking on here tonight that does enjoy a little bit more privacy, a little bit more of aesthetic, certainly. But again, we are able to take these comparisons and to adjust accordingly to best meet the subject property. 1,142 square feet for comparable number 1, built in the early 1900s, rated C average and fair condition, 0.24 acres and more of a rural fair designated neighborhood. 1 bedroom, 3 bedrooms, 1 full bathrooms. And we also had a note from within too. Furnace had water damage at time of sale and that the basement typically floods annually as well. There is no garage on the property. Comparable sale number 2 was taken from outside of the community in the town of Hardwick, 33 Daniels Road, sold May 4th of 2021 for $60,000. Again, this is a property that was sold with the intent that it needed to be gutted. The previous owner who owned this property had basically let it get away from them, and the current owner has now purchased the property, is undergoing a full renovation with the idea that the property is then going to be resold. It's in more of a village fair designated neighborhood on 0.3 acres, and again, was gutted after purchase.
Matt, we're going to stop you right there. We're going to be coming back to you after we let Paul end up doing.
My end's gonna be really short.
Okay, do you mind if he continues that?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Could I just ask a question?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, just on definition.
Okay, comparable sale number 3, again, was from the town of Hardwick, 2564 Route 16, sold March 19th of 2021 for $95,000. Again, to just summarize, this property was sold. It needed to be gutted at time of sale. The idea is that once the renovation work is complete, it is to then be resold. So to sell at that $95,000 threshold, still with that intent. And this property, once again, is heavily influenced by the traffic off of Route 16 heading towards the town of Greensboro. Market analysis conclusion on page 6. You can see the individual adjustments. The majority of the adjustments that were made here were relatively conservative, but they come from within the system that we have currently set up here in the town of Coventry. So to best replicate how we would differentiate between a C grade home or a C+ grade or a home in fair condition versus a home in average condition, I certainly tried to keep the adjustments apples to apples in this case. Final conclusions, all 3 comparables reflect the value of properties in need of substantial renovation work. although comparable one sold with finished living area in place, the home was very worn and in a less desirable location. Comparable 3 is a much more heavily trafficked location and needed to be gutted after sale. All 3 comparables are much smaller in size versus the subject property. Comparables 2 and 3 are from the town of Hardwick. It's worth noting that the tax rate in Hardwick is substantially higher than in the community of Coventry. The 2021-22 cumulative tax rate for Hardwick was 3.0874 versus in Coventry in that time period, 1.0528, substantially less in terms of the tax burden. Certainly, it's a much more desirable situation to pay taxes in the community of Coventry. Coventry also has the benefit of school choice as well. So I truly believe that the location of this property far exceeds all 3 comparables in this case. The adjusted sales range from $67,325 to $84,100. The cutting property fits well within that adjusted sales range. To conclude, do believe certainly that 67.7 is a fair assessment for the subject property for the year 2022.
Thank you, Matthew.
Apologize if I exceeded the 5 minutes.
Nice.
And that goes to Paul. Ask the appellant to present their case and explain the basis of the appeal. You will have 15 minutes to do
I'm
so.
only going to need 2 sentences.
Okay.
Okay, I paid 26 for it. The only thing I put into it is 14 dumpsters. You're more than welcome to tour it. I have the security code for the lot. It's not worth much. It's almost, it would be worth more money as a lot. I think that's all.
I'll ask now the assessor to respond to the appellant's case. You have up to 10 minutes to do so.
So I would just say to address the sale price of 26,000, that 26,000 figure, according to our records, was purchased in foreclosure. So there was certainly a level of stress to that sale. Certainly it was in poor condition at the time of sale, but it was purchased from an Opportunities Credit Union, January 14th of 2021. That would not be looked at necessarily as a valid arm's length market sale at that point. We would not base an assessment off of a sale, certainly, that we deem to be invalid at that point. In terms of the cost to cure, whether it's dumpsters, we assess on a market approach to value and not necessarily a cost approach to value. So an example that I give, it's not necessarily applicable to what the appellant has said here, but I'm a builder, I incur the cost of materials. I'll go out and I'll purchase materials for, let's say, 100,000, 150,000. I go ahead and build myself a house on 10 acres. Does that mean that that house is necessarily only worth 100 to 150,000, the cost that I have into it? Not necessarily. The market is certainly going to differ in that case. So I would just kind of counter with those 2 points. The only other point that I would certainly make is that statutorily, the state is very clear that the presumption of correctness when it comes to an assessment is within the assessor's or the lister's favor. And the both burden of production and the burden of persuasion is with the appellant. So I would just certainly, that's in the handbook in terms of the appeals, how appeals go. So I would just ask you, certainly, has what the appellant has said to you, has that met both the burden of persuasion and production?
What was the date of your appraisal?
The date of our appraisal for the town, technically April 1st of 2022.
You also,
So it didn't fall in.
David, you're
line.
jumping
gotta
ahead.
wait a
I'm sorry.
You're jumping ahead, please.
I'm sorry.
Does that
Yes,
complete
it
your?
does. Yep.
So now we can ask any BCA member who has a direct question to pose it to the appropriate party. And David, go ahead.
So you said April 27, 22. So you didn't do it during the townwide appraisal in 20, was it 20 or 21?
That was for the full townwide reappraisal. This property was actually adjusted, David, for this year. We actually came down $100 technically. So Mr. Cutting was sent a change of appraisal notice. That, I believe, was on the basis of the under construction credit being adjusted We had a data collector visit this property on April 8th of 2022, and it was deemed that the property be reduced by $100. So 88,000 was the 2021 assessment. We sent Mr. Cutting a change of appraisal notice for 87,900, reducing it by $100, and that's certainly what has triggered this appeal. But technically for fiscal year 2022, our appraisal date is April 1st of 22.
You set with that, Dave?
I do have a question.
You set?
More of a clarification. What does VF, Village Fair Neighborhood mean?
So when we do townwide reappraisals in any community, we're responsible for grading a neighborhood. So whether it's more of a village, a traffic, a rural designation, the assessor or the reappraisal company would make a judgment as to what grade a neighborhood needs to be assigned. So in the case of the village fair, the comparable that I gave you from Hardwick, it's more of a dense village setting. There are kind of closer together lots. And the idea was in 2016, when those neighborhoods were set, it was a below average neighborhood, but more in a village setting. So that was a decision that was made by the reappraisal company at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Matthew, I was confused. You said the appraisal originally came in at some $80,000 figure. And
So correct. So for
can you go
2000
into that further about what brought it from the 80,000 to the 67,000?
I don't have our internal notes handy
Well, I
here.
can sort of clarify that. So the first year, I just kind of let it slide. And I paid the taxes on the 87. And then I said, I mean, it's kind of not worth it. But, you know, so we sort of looked at it and said, I don't know if you could actually get 67,000 for it as is, possibly now, possible. But I do dispute the graded C. I would say, I would give it sort of a, maybe a high F at this point. If you look inside, that would be my estimation. Not that I'm disputing your, you know, your expertise. I'm just saying that's my opinion.
So I'm kind of confused. You're saying, you're telling me two numbers, 87.9 and 67. What number are we arguing?
Yeah.
67.7 is the current
67.
assessment.
Yeah.
So I paid him last year for the 87 this year.
It was basically lowered close to 20 grand at grievance. We made the adjustment about 20 grand, and that was increasing the under construction percentage. I'll just say there's no such thing as an F grade certainly in our system. So in terms of how it's calibrated, nothing like that actually exists.
I mean,
We do strive ultimately for, regardless of how the data is itemized, we want it to be a fair market assessment. If I were to market this property fairly, what kind of price would it command? I think certainly that if Mr. Cutting had this property on the market right now, and that price was lower than what we had it assessed at, I think that would be very relevant. But without any sort of tangible evidence from the appellant side, it's kind of a guessing game at that point.
So what triggered so it was originally assessed, you bought it, it was originally assessed at 89 by the town,
88,000.
88 by the town, by
21, correct.
And what action brought it down to the 67? Was it Paul questioning it, but it didn't come to us?
that's correct.
So it went back to you and who set the 67?
I did in
Okay.
grievance. I made the decision that indeed, Mr. Cutting, from what he testified to us in grievance, that it deserved more of an under construction credit based on the status of the building. So we increased that percentage to 50% incomplete based on our Marshall and Swift cost table.
Okay.
So
But-
what are you specifically asking from us? Well, I don't,
Paula's requesting to have the amount lowered.
I mean,
Question
I'm not looking to cut, split hairs here. You
no,
guys
you're
want to
you're
lower
looking to
it?
go
Great,
lower than
if you don't,
67.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'll
that's what
accept it.
he's-
I'm just
yeah.
here sort of saying, I don't think I can get 67 for it right now. That's all I'm saying.
Now, what is your intent going to be with that? Are you going to be converting it into a house
When I
and
have
putting it on
time,
the market? Or
remodel it, but I don't know when that's going to be.
do you have a time frame as far as when that possibly may happen?
Could be 2 years, could be 4 years.
Okay.
Kind of depends on what's going
And your grading level, Matt, is it like A, B, C, and C is the lowest level, or is there A, B, C, D? How does that?
D typically is the lowest level, and it's in the grade of the building is really about originally, what kind of a quality original building is it at that point? It's separate certainly from condition. We can look at condition independently. So we're basically saying that this is a very average built home for the original year that it was constructed. It's certainly not all due respect to Mr. Cutting, it's not a fancy house. It doesn't have any ornate trim to it or center cut chimneys or hardwood finishes or anything like that at all. So we're basically saying that for a late 1800s potentially build, this is a very average built home.
Is it historically significant? Is 1880, is that,
So I wouldn't say necessarily we're putting a value on it because of its historical significance. It has more to do with, again, what would the market bear based on our analysis. So we talk about what sales, what the real estate market has looked like over the last 3 years. And that's certainly what we're comparing it to here. And I should say 2 out of my 3 comparables were sold basically in a very similar condition to Mr. Cutting's property, and they still yielded sale prices of over $60,000. So to show you that even the demand for a property that needs a real level of renovation work and needs a real investment added into it, the market is still willing to bear, in 2 cases, $60,000 and $95,000 for a home.
But did the other properties have a cow living in this? Just a question.
Well, one of them basically, it's probably not appropriate for me to say this, one of them basically had a hoarder living in it. That's the reason that the whole entire thing needs to be gutted at that point, so.
Well, I guess the hoarder trumps the cow.
This is direct, Paul, is the garage essentially the same condition as the house as far as age? Or it looks like a
The previous
newer.
owner took half the rafters out of the garage, so those have to be put back at some point.
But do you know when the garage was built or what the age of the garage is?
That's a Dave and Judy Poirier question. I couldn't tell you.
Are they the ones who built it, Dave and Judy?
I think they did the addition. I think Red McAllister. actually.
Probably 80s.
Yeah, probably early
80s.
80s. But the previous owner did take half the 2x10 rafters. Just,
That'd be a feat.
Paul,
he
could I
must have
just,
needed materials.
Yeah.
Paul, could I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have a figure in mind that you were looking at to be the appraisal price?
Not really.
Not really?
Realistically, I feel like, I think he has some solid points. I'm just saying, I don't think I can get 67 for it current. I agree with him on most points. I think the 67 is a little high. I'm not gonna split hairs, if you guys vote against me, I don't really care, but I figured it was worth a shot.
What are you hoping for? You must have a figure in mind.
Oh, I don't know, somewhere in the 50 range would be cool. That's what I'm looking for. I think if you're gonna go out and buy a lot with power, water, sewer, you would have at least, 60 probably into it. But with the house, I feel like that's sort of a detriment because it's really a big pile.
So all the power, the sewage and the water and everything is good up there.
Well, I don't have any of that, but yes, it could be powered up, yes. I just don't have that done.
It's on site.
Yeah,
It's
so we
there.
used to have
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
And the water, is that the same as the whole
That's
county?
The
the
water's
fire
not hooked
district.
up to-
Okay,
It's just not hooked up, but it's there.
but it can be,
Well, I do pay the water bill, but I don't use
right. And you don't think you'd be doing anything on your property for at least a couple of years, maybe more?
it. Based on work, I would say no.
And when would we do another town appraisal?
Well, this property, because it has that under construction credit, as I've been describing, it basically tags it for our office to observe it any given year as close to April 1st as possible. So typically what we do is if we determine that we've been to a property, let's say for 3 consecutive years, and there's really not a lot of progress getting made, we may kind of reprioritize it and at least do a drive-by on it to determine whether or not anything's being done. But that under construction percentage flags it to be viewed every April 1st or as close to April 1st to see if there's progress being made.
I mean, having said that, it could be sooner than later. I have no idea, but
Yeah.
who knows? I'm gonna say 2 years.
Okay.
Could be 6 months.
Other questions?
Gonna throw out that if it's in the condition it is in now, if Paul feels like 50, whatever, and it's gonna be that way for another year, they do another look, it's still the same positioning, it's still in the same structure it is right now. He hasn't really made any improvements.
Well, I mean, it was visually, there's a huge improvement.
Oh, yeah, I know
But,
that.
I mean,
You can tell
really,
that.
The only thing I'm into it is 14 dumpsters, that's it. That's all
But
I-
I'm just looking at, if you're looking to drop it, but as soon as you start doing something, then it's gotta go back up, I guess, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's gonna go up eventually.
Is this a business, Sharon? You flip? Is it,
I
or
mean, I don't know.
toy with it?
Do I do anything? I don't know.
Okay.
I'm still trying to figure out what I do.
What's furniture?
Our real world.
Any other questions to anybody? Okay, so our procedure is that we ask for 3 BCA members to form an inspection committee to perform an on-site review of the property, and this report will need to be presented to the BCA board within 30 days of this hearing. So I would look for volunteers.
When are you gonna do it?
Sherry,
I'm close enough, I can go to.
Just be
Richard,
careful going down the stairs in the basement.
I'll do it.
Go downstairs.
you would be there.
I don't climb.
You would be there.
Okay, so we have our 3.
We got 3. Who was the
Yeah.
third?
We have Anita, Richard, and Sherry.
I
Okay.
can give you the security code for the front door when you're ready.
Uh,
You sure you don't want to be there?
Not really.
You can,
I
that's
don't
fine.
need to be there.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So
And I can just email.
Okay, yeah.
It'd be pretty easy.
You
Yeah.
can do it, you live right down.
So if we don't need Paul's involvement, do we need to set up a time now, or can we?
No,
Have
I
the
should
3.
say we should still, so at least he is aware.
Okay, so we need to establish a convenient time for reviewing the property, day and time that works for you 3 members that volunteered.
And make
So
sure
who would suggest a date?
We have 30 days. you said.
30 days. Richard obviously doesn't need a calendar.
Richard doesn't need a calendar, is correct. I'm pretty open most days.
What's that?
How about Thursday, August 11th? That's 2 weeks from today.
Thursday, August 11th.
At what time, Sherry?
I suggest 9:30.
Yeah, I'd say.
In the morning?
Go to work afterwards.
That way, or 9.
Yeah.
That way you
Okay.
can.
All right, 9 o'clock, August 11th.
9 o'clock.
Are you up, Richard?
Excuse me,
9 o'clock?
I don't have a calendar with me, so mine's on my wall on the computer, so I will let you know if it's not convenient for me.
9 o'clock. not 9.
Yeah, they changed
9
it to
o'clock.
9 instead of 9:30.
That's why she was asking if you were.
Is 9 o'clock too early?
Are you up in the morning, Richard? No,
You're hurtful right now, girl.
I'm sorry.
You're hurtful.
Is 9 o'clock okay?
It will be, I guess.
Okay.
2 out of 3.
Do you want to work with Paul to get the code so that that he doesn't have to announce it to us?
Yep.
Yeah, if you just email it, then I'll just send it.
Okay,
It's pretty.
Yep, yep.
Actually, I can give it to you before.
okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And then we also need to set the date to reconvene to hear the report from the inspection committee and to make our decision.
And I would ask Paul if it's okay. What we'd like to do is sort of make that in conjunction with Casella's as well.
No, that's fine. I'm not looking for miracles.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go ahead, we'll establish a date for when we'll be reconvening back for them, and then I'll touch base with you just to make sure that
Yeah,
date and
that's
time
fine.
works for you. Okay,
That's all good.
perfect. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Does the BCA board feel that a deliberative session is accordance with 1 VSA section 312E is necessary at this time?
No.
If so, then I would request a motion to enter deliberative session. I would suggest it is not needed at this time as we need to receive the inspection committee report for further information. So,
So moved. I'm not gonna
geez.
repeat it all.
Okay, so in that case, no deliberative session. In the meantime, I ask you please review all the information that has been presented to this board today until the next meeting. I remind all inspection committee and appellants that the on-site visits are not opportunities for us to gather more information, more evidence, but for us to have an understanding of the facility and how they function. No additional information can be given to the inspection committee, and no discussion of this hearing or the upcoming hearing can be had. If you want to present additional information to this board, you may do so at the reconvene date that has been set.
Just say this hearing has been reconvened.
So what?
This hearing has been reconvened for a later date.
So now we are saying that this hearing is being reconvened on a later date.
For a later, yes.
We're all set with you, Paul.
Okay, all right, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for coming in.
So we'll just take a quick 3-minute break. People can get up, just move around for a little bit, and then we'll get into our next hearing.
Get a piece of pie.
So I will take this and give you your next
I
one.
don't know if there's anything left over there. Who made the pie?
West Side, Dell.
Oh, this, you get to say that?
Yeah. All of that comes from there. Here's gonna be your next one.
Did you leave this over here for me besides saying that's all my
I gotta
signature?
sign that. You signed it, right?
Yep. I don't need this. Do I keep
Nope,
that?
you don't. You can keep that
I'll
for
keep that for
yourself,
my
but
consideration for the next one.
These are just copies of the appraiser card. That's one.
okay.
At least they're not in a hurry home to watch the Red Sox. Who the hell wants to watch that?
Oh,
I was at bed last night. I had this habit lately of, okay, they're leading 6-5. I'm going to bed. If they lose, I don't want to watch it. You get up in the morning and say, hey.
more of a hockey guy, so it's a hockey season.
Well, there's less of this going on.
Yeah, right. TV's not good for me. It's a great presentation. Nameplates for everybody too. It's great.
Of course. I mean, all our people be like, what?
I had a town clerk who they asked me, she was like, "Can you help us like use the procedure?" And I was like, I can't use the procedure. She's like, well, we don't really know. It's like,
Oh my
it's like a real
goodness. Wow, this is the next one. Yeah. What's that? I did not make one for everyone. No, but this is the next one. Yes, this is the next one, correct. Okay, glad I don't work here. So you're gonna have this one up?
Oh, he's got this. He's got.
I haven't been following this one through. Makes more sense. There's not a.
How many do you got? I mean, was there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
When I saw it was 30 minutes.
I know.
I looked at it. quite a bit.
That's why it was sort of like.
True. Second was. Oh, that's too sweet. Too sweet.
What am I doing?
No, you did something.
I'm not gonna tell you, I
You
didn't
did
do
something.
what I did.
You did something. No matter what you think.
Well, yeah. I've heard that part.
I need all this.
So he said, I don't.
Oh, I think that's so good. It is. There is a lot of sugar.
What is it?
There is a lot.
I watched.
I'm not used to that.
This is a new exhibit
All right.
that we are given by the assessor.
You almost see it jumping out.
Yes, I would too. I was so surprised that he was.
You ready? What's what? Right there.
Let's bring the meeting to order.
We will call this meeting back to order. And I'll ask the clerk of the board to verify the auto tape recorder is on.
Got the thumbs up.
Put the thumbs up. Today is July 28th, 2022. Current time is 6:12 PM. We're holding this hearing at the Coventry Community Center to hear property tax grievance of New England Services of Vermont / Casella. Property location is 21 Landfill Lane. Do I need to say all that? Including landfill, methane plant, residential and commercial dwellings, farm and acreage, parcel number 0TH02021. And they and others who will be participating in this hearing. So I would ask the appellants and their representatives who are speaking on behalf of the appellants to please stand, state your name, and stay standing for the oath.
Sure. Colin McKenzie, I'm the Vice President of Taxation for Casella Waste Systems, which is the parent company of News of Vermont Inc., which owns the subject property. And I'm Andy McElwain, I'm counsel for Casella.
I ask the assessor and their representatives who are speaking on their behalf to please stand, state your name, and stay standing for the oath.
William Krajewski, assessor.
Matthew Krajewski, Assessor's Office.
Okay, if you can go ahead and raise your right hand. Under the things and penalties of perjury, do you solemnly swear that the evidence you give in the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? 12 BSA 5810.
Yes.
Okay, I'll come around.
Are there any BCA members who need to recuse themselves from this hearing due to a conflict of interest? I'd ask if you step forward and say so at this time. Hearing none, we will begin hearing from the evidence. And you want me to introduce this at this time?
You probably will when they go to sleep.
Okay,
You're probably doing it 15 minutes.
okay. So first I'll ask the assessor to give a brief introduction, simply establishing how the assessor determined the value of the property, providing the necessary background for the case. And you have up to 5 minutes to do so.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief. The town of Coventry commissioned an appraisal of this property back for the 2021 reappraisal. It was done by Skip Sansucci. And he submitted that appraisal for 2021 for the town. The property is a landfill with a number of other homes and a couple of farms that have been bought up over the period of time to create some protection around the property. Approximately just over 1,000 acres, 1,056 odd acres. The current value of the property is $54,512,700. Of that value, about 52 million was established by Skip Sansucci in his appraisal, and the remaining value is because of the 7 dwellings, farms, farm buildings, and some additional land that was there that was not a part of his appraisal. I'm going to kind of leave things the way they are. I know there was some issues last year with some filing by News Vermont. And this year they filed an appeal in a valid manner. We heard it as assessors and we turned it down. And we're kind of waiting for a presentation from their part, but just as succinctly as I can, you paid money for a very professional, very good appraiser to set a value on this property. And I think the town, it's beyond my expertise to sit there and say, oh, I concur, but I have faith in what Skip had to do. I've read the report over. I think he examined it properly. So I think this value is a valid value that adds its place. And that's really the only testimony I'm going to give here. I think Skip's report should speak for itself.
And I understand this is added to our
Yes,
list of
that's just the
evidence.
appraisal cards themselves.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And now I'll ask the appellant to present their case and explain the basis for the appeal, and you have 15 minutes to do so.
Thank you. I'll start off before I turn it over to Connor, because he's really going to speak to the specific issues and disagreements we have with Mr. Sansucci's appraisal. But I just want to start off, first of all, by thanking everybody for the opportunity to be here, present to you all in person. Had the pleasure to meet with Bill and Matt back during the grievance hearing, and I thought we had a productive conversation. Just so the board understands, we have engaged an independent appraiser to assist us with preparing a formal appraisal for the property. We're not in a position to provide an opinion of value for this property because that appraisal hasn't been completed yet. But despite that, I think that Connor will be able to speak to a number of issues that support our position that Mr. Sansucci's appraisal, which frankly resulted in a pretty significant 5-fold increase in the value of this property, we don't think is valid. And with that, I'll turn it over to Connor.
Sure. So as stated, right, this is for the April 1st, 2022 valuation date, but it's based on an appraisal that was done in 2021. And, you know, as Andy said, you know, I think at this stage, we want to use this as an opportunity to raise some of the issues we see with the 2021 appraisal and just start to, just let you all know some of the issues that we see. So, as stated in the Sansucci report, it's an as-is retrospective opinion on market value for a fee simple interest in the subject property
based on market conditions as of the valuation date. So it's important to note that the relevant value is the real property alone. So that, basically real property means land and permanent improvements that are fixed to it. The real property value excludes tangible personal property, so things like tables and chairs, and it excludes intangible property like the value of the business operating it or trademarks, that type of thing. As noted in the appraisal, there's 3 commonly accepted methods for valuing real property. There's the income approach, there's 2, there's the sales comparison approach, and 3, there's the cost approach. And we agree with this as a general matter. These are the 3 main methods used. What we do disagree with is how these methods were employed with regard to the landfill property. The San Souci report considered but did not use the sales comparison approach. And the appraisal report states that the sales comparison approach is generally not appropriate for landfills. And we do not disagree with this. We agree that it's not appropriate to use the sales comparison approach. For one thing, landfills don't change hands very often outside of the sale of an entire business. And so comparable sales are pretty hard to come by. So that leaves the other 2, the income approach and the cost approach. The San Souci report considered and used both the cost approach and the income-based approach, and arrived at a similar valuation under both methods. So they got close to that $52 million figure under both the cost and the income approach. Generally speaking, the cost approach is problematic for landfills because there can be large swings in year to year when you use a cost method for a landfill. And that's because when you build a new cell to hold waste, it's very expensive to do. So when you put a new cell into place, the cost goes way up. But then as you begin to fill it, it gets depleted or depreciated, utilized. So the cost goes way down. So every 2 or 3 years or so, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. So in the case of landfills, the income approach, specifically the market rent or royalty approach, is recognized as the most accurate and commonly accepted method to value landfill real property. This method has been adopted and recommended by numerous local taxing jurisdictions, courts, tax board of appeals, the International Association of Assessing Officers. Given the widespread endorsement of this method of valuation, we're surprised that their appraisal did not indicate whether they considered the market rent method or why they didn't use it. So I guess our position is that this is really, in our view, the gold standard method for valuing landfills. And the report basically doesn't mention it. Doesn't say that we considered it, we don't think it's appropriate, it's just not used. We think there's a number of mistakes or discrepancies in the underlying assumptions as well. And we'd like to highlight some of the concerns for the board today. And hopefully, you give them consideration. So one, it's important to understand again, it's an as of value, as of, in the case of the appraisal report, April 1st, 2021. It's not a prospective future value. It's a retrospective tax value for tax assessment of real property, not of the business enterprise or equity of the business. So the principle of substitution is basic or fundamental to the cost approach. So the idea with substitution is if you're going to, how much would it cost to buy and build a similar property somewhere else? So the cost of the land and then a cost of the improvements less depreciation. So that's the idea of substitution. That's what you do for the cost approach. However, you don't use the principle of anticipation. That's part of the income approach. So with the cost approach, you don't consider what the value would be if you built something in the future. It's what's built on the land as of that date. And this is something that the San Souci report didn't do. It took into account, I'll get into it in a minute, but anticipated future construction included in the cost method valuation. And we believe that's just plainly incorrect. It's an as-is approach to provide replacement or reproduction costs, less some accrued depreciation as of the relevant date. Moving to the income approach, the principle of anticipation, which holds that the value is the present worth of future benefits. It's basic to the income approach. So with the income approach, it's taking into account, what is the value of this property? What kind of income can it bring in value for the real property alone? Market rent method is typically used to value real property like retail buildings, golf courses, or landfills. So I'd like to drill a little further down on the income approach. Based on the income approach that was used in the Sanssouci report, it appears that the appraiser was valuing the entire going concern of the business operating the landfill. In other words, the appraisal appears to be valuing News of Vermont's landfill business, including personal property and tangible property, basically the value of the overall operation and not just the real property. Again, the tax is imposed on the real property, so you have to get back to isolating what's the real property value. And it just wasn't clear how they went from valuing business enterprise to trying to isolate it down to just the real property value. And this is really important for landfills because, as is often the case in the industry, Casella owns the landfill as part of a vertically integrated waste management business. So they own landfills, they own collection, and it all, transfer stations, and they all kind of feed into each other. And this, a lot of the value, right, of the business enterprise from operating a landfill is impacted by Casella's specialized business acumen, assembled workforce, client contacts, client relationships. In other words, it's a lot of the value coming out of the landfill comes from Casella's very specialized knowledge and operating in a very regulated industry. So if you don't find a way to strip out the value of Casella's business value, you're overvaluing the real property. So for this reason, the royalty method is the preferred method of getting at this piece of saying what is the real property alone worth. And that's the idea, is because if you're doing it correctly, the royalty method is looking at similar leases. So in some cases, landfills are leased out. There's a property owner and they lease it out to an operator. And if you do some analysis, you figure out what are those leases worth on the market. It's kind of typically the landlord's not investing anything else into it. So their income stream should approximate just what the real property is worth, because that's the only thing the landlord's contributing to the operation. Again, I just want to, really, I don't think this point can be stated enough. And this is really the prevalent method, and it just wasn't addressed in the Sanssouci's report. Some other issues I point out include the fact that it appeared that the appraisal report just used the gate rate or fee. So there's a published rate for how much it costs to deposit waste in the landfill. However, as is again very common in the industry, the gate rate does not reflect the actual average cost of the fees, because this is impacted by typical industry factors such as volume discounts, intercompany amounts. You've got to factor in the covering material that's brought into the landfill, and you have to make other adjustments for state fees and taxes. And there just wasn't any analysis done on that. The appraisal report just took the gate rate and didn't really do any analysis. Again, and if you look at cases that involve landfills, this is typically something that a lot of analysis is done on to arrive at what's the actual effective tipping fee. It's not the rate that's posted at the gate. Similar to hotels, sometimes there'll be a rate posted on the door, but that may not be what's actually charged when you go to rent the room. I'll turn next to the cost method used in the report. So again, this is intended to reflect the value as of April 21. But the appraisal report includes future landfill expansion, which has not been constructed yet. So as I stated earlier, the principle of substitution is basic to the cost approach, not the principle of anticipation or future benefits. Future costs should not be included in the computation. The appraisal appears to attempt to value the entire permitted or permittable 51 acres, but the whole 51 acres has not been constructed or placed in service yet. In fact, as of April 1, 2021, only about 550,000 tons of constructed capacity for existence. And if we look at the whole 51 acres, just using very round figures, that probably works out to about 13 million tons of capacity, assuming that you're able to get the permits and do the, and feasibility analysis, you're able to put the entire 51 acres into service. That might be about 13 million tons of capacity. And again, in service as of 2021, it was only 500,000 tons. The appraisal included the entire 51 acres or 13 million tons of capacity, which we just think is just plainly inappropriate and just inaccurate. It's the appraisal estimates that it costs about 1 million per acre to construct a landfill, and goes to value the entire landfill as of April 1, coming up with a value of $51 million. In other words, they put a value on costs that don't exist. And I know it's kind of a lot, and apologies for having to read, but it's a pretty there's a lot of details in this appraisal, and I wanted to make sure that there's a lot of fine points I want to make sure to cover. But I hope it's been helpful to kind of outline some of our concerns here with the report. As mentioned, it resulted in a roughly 5-fold increase in the value. And we are working on our own independent appraisal to come up with what we think is the correct number. But in the meantime, we just think there are some issues with this report that result in the correct valuation. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Connor.
Sure.
Excuse me. So now I'd ask the assessor to respond to the appellant's case, and you have up to 10 minutes.
Okay, just a couple of points that I'd like to make. I've spent some time since Connor brought it to my attention about the royalty method, looking at it. And one of the general comments I read about it is that it has a tendency to favor landfills in terms of valuation. So the accuracy of it, I'm not going to testify, but the common comment I keep hearing, this is what favors the landfill and not necessarily a taxing jurisdiction. Second point I'd like to make is about fair market value. The idea that we're valuing future benefits. Of course we are. We always are. If I have a subdivision, I've got a 60-acre lot, and I have another 60-acre lot next to it, and it has a permit in place to put 10 house lots in it. That house lot, that 60 acres is worth more than the one that does not have the subdivision permit in place. So permits in place add value to the property. Absolutely they do, because we're after fair market value. So the idea somehow that these cells add nothing to the fair market value of this property doesn't make much sense to me anyway. I think the other point I would make to you is this, and again, please, I'm not an expert, but this is about real property more than anything else. Being able to site a landfill, it's got to be, ask the town of Dalton, New Hampshire, what it's like. It's not an easy thing to do. So the idea that somehow the business itself and my business acumen is worth much more, a lot more than the real property, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If Waste Management were to come in and purchase this, they'd have their team. The whole idea that we're the only ones who can run this. No, there are other waste management companies and landfill companies in this country who would. It's the site itself that's worth it, particularly its capacity. That's got to be the lion's share of the value far and away, because they're almost impossible to site. It's like trying to site a nuclear power plant or any number of things like that. Good luck trying to put it down. So when we have one that exists, that has permits moving forward in the future, and seems to, and this isn't part of the valuation end of it, but seems to have the blessing of the state of Vermont to some degree. In other words, I think the state knows there's a real need for this, and they're going to do what they can to help this project continue into the future. You never know what goes on, but I would suggest you that 50 years from now, the likelihood is there'll be something still going on there. It might have expanded. It might be wrong too. You can't guess that. But the point is it's a pretty critical piece of infrastructure for New England, for Vermont, particularly for New England. So the point is everything they have to say, everything holds water. I do understand that. And obviously, I don't think this board's left with much of a decision to make, because we're not going to get a value to back up with tonight and everything. But I just keep that in mind as you move forward in negotiations or whatnot, that we need to sit down and look very deeply at some of these things and try to determine what best suits the town, and what best determines the value. That's not what best suits the town, excuse me. What best determines the valuation of the property.
Before I ask other BCA members for questions, I'm going to ask a few. We have up to 20 minutes. So I'd like a little bit of background. First, you've requested an independent appraisal. Do you know when that's going to be done or how quickly that will be assembled?
Well, I think I can represent to the town that the town and Casella, through the town's legal counsel, have a mediation scheduled in September. And basically it's because of anticipated litigation over this. We are likely going to be having an appraisal prepared in advance of the mediation. I don't know that we'll have it prepared before the BCA would render a decision.
And Skip Sansouci, is this a specialty of him? Is he all over the world doing appraisals?
I can't say all over the world, it's all over the country. I'm not quite sure I can say all over the world.
I
Yes,
assume
he's been
there
in
are, but this is the area that he concentrates on.
He's very highly regarded in this field. Yes, this power plant. He did your utilities too.
What was the prior assessed value?
10 million in a piece, I think. Let me just look before I say that. Prior to Mr. Sansouci, it was 10,796,400.
And now it's gone up to 52 million.
50, well, the total is 54,512,700.
And have there been, since the prior going to the current, have there been new contracts put in place, new permits that would account for that? Or is it just the fact that this town's now gotten a full appraisal?
I couldn't answer you as to when the last time the town did an appraisal on the landfill prior to this 2021. I'm not sure what that.
Or how, or Bill, how they even got it?
Don't, I assume it was a negotiated value more than likely, but I don't.
Any big changes in contracts or permits from prior to current?
From the pre-Sansouci appraised value to the current one. I think what I could say is that I don't think there's any substantial enough change.
No new cells permitted?
I mean, so since 2021, the new cell has been put in place, right, for effectively the 2022 year. And that was just, like I said, just put in place. But to my knowledge, I don't want to misspeak. I can go back and confirm, if any dramatic changes there might have been. But my understanding is that if there is anything, any change that would justify a fivefold increase, just from,
Just so we can be clear, because I'm not sure, but the $10 million value was probably set in 2009 or 10 or something. That's been in place for all those years up until the time we did reappraisal.
That sound right? Yep. It's
Yeah.
just been a steady.
I can only answer, my card shows back to 2018, but I suspect back into 2009, 2010 at least.
Other questions from the board?
No, I was just wondering when the last appraisal was, how we came up with the 10,000. And I'm assuming it's been many years, like you said. So now it's kind of like when we did culverts or the sand and gravel, when we had to do, so it's kind of along that standard of where is it at? And I believe, from what I'm hearing, we started really low because now we come to this number. So what has transpired in all these years to have this guy come up with this amount? I don't know, but I'm assuming. But you don't know when you're going to get your appraisal. So we really don't know where you're disputing your numbers, right?
No, I think.
I mean, are you saying like, well, we only think it's 20 million and we're saying 52 million?
again, at the risk of disclosing a number that I'm not at liberty to disclose, I think I can tell you it's a lot closer to where it was pre-2021. What I'd also suggest too, because I think neither Bill nor I is obviously an expert at appraising landfills, but I think it's important to stress that landfill properties, based on what we've learned, not only what I've learned internally from conversations with Connor and also with our independent appraiser, there is an accepted method for valuation. It is the royalty approach. Courts have applied that approach. To my knowledge, Mr. Sansucci has a vast background in appraising public utilities. I do not know that he has an expertise in appraising landfills. If Bill knows the answer to that, perhaps he can provide that information. I could be wrong, but that is the sort of the core of our concern about this appraisal.
Yeah, go ahead.
My understanding by listening to you, the person that you've hired has knowledge of landfills. In other words, they have all that knowledge. They've done more than one or two that this is their primary concern to, or is it?
I don't know how many landfills
But they are very knowledgeable about landfills and stuff. Okay.
So,
Go ahead. And
so which cell is the new one you're working on? That you just had permits for?
So at risk of misspeaking, my general understanding is there's a general approval for a 51-acre expansion that was recently granted. But then you have to go cell by cell, right? You wouldn't construct, could be prohibitively expensive to say if you've got 51 acres that you could potentially have a landfill on. No landfill operator would open up the 51 acres at once because they're too expensive. So you typically do a roughly 3-year, something that's roughly big enough to hold about 3 years of waste if you go cell by cell. And also my understanding is that there's permitting process. It's very highly engineered, these landfill cells, and you need to get permits at each stage of the construction. And my understanding is it's, until you actually get the final approval for each cell that you're going to build, it's never a sure thing.
So the other part, I guess, is, so there's one cell. Does that include, when you say you had one cell per permit, does that include A, B, C, and D? Cell 4A, 4B, 4C, 4D? Is that?
Yeah, no, I don't know one of our engineers that knows it off the top of their head, but I couldn't tell you which letter number cell was just opened, but I do know that one was the most recent cell was just opened after the appraisal date.
Right. I guess what I was asking is, if a cell called, say, 4, does cell 4 include the other 4 subsections of it? Just because then that means the permit is so much larger than just small, like 4A versus 4B. See, am I making myself?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, I guess again, my understanding is that a cell was recently approved that's large enough to hold roughly 3 years of waste, and that there's additional land on which additional cells could eventually be built, but you need to get each of them permitted, designed, feasibility analysis and all that before you can proceed with the rest of those. Does that help at all? I can also go back.
That's okay.
I apologize if I'm missing the question too.
the thing that catches my attention,
Yeah.
and I'm just a layman, I'm by no means an expert on the landfill, except I get to look at it from my golf course.
Yeah.
But assuming that the $10,000, 10 million of 15 years ago or so was a reasonable figure that was attained by consensus. And since 15 years ago, there's been several cells, additional land, I don't know, but several cells with all the infrastructure that goes into them, the linings and the layers and the piping, which must cost millions of dollars, I assume. Then I hardly, just throwing out your 20 million, I hardly believe it been less than 20 million that's gone into the improvements. But in any case, every time that happens, you've increased the value of the infrastructure. You've increased the resources that are in there, but also the capacity and the ability to fill that, which is, when it's filled, it's creating unknown value, which, you know, even Bill says he can't determine that.
Right.
I just, I don't know, I don't know where we're going to settle with this, but if we looked at all of those improvements over the last 15 years, or whenever that $10 million was attained, it's got to be a substantial figure. And I'm assuming we'll come up to some agreement somewhere in the future. But it sounds like an unfathomable number that we're not going to easily attain.
Wouldn't everything Don just spoke to now be a depreciation? Wouldn't everything Don just spoke to, money and improvements made at the landfill, the money spent on the landfill, would that now be in a depreciation mode, given those cells are full?
Typically, I would look at it, like, when we talk about the infrastructure that's gone into it, I understand that. But once the cell's been filled, that value is attained through the removal of methane, and that's about it. It's gone, so to speak. So to sit there and say, I made a $10 million investment here, doesn't mean that once it's filled, that's still worth $10 million.
And I suppose the value of the land, once it's filled, is reduced.
Well,
Because it's got time constraints on the.
it can be, but it also, there is and I think Connor spoke to this when we were, there's a lot of talk about remining certain areas of it, that there's a possibility as they move forward to be able to reopen certain areas, remine. So it's hard to say, but it certainly won't be as valuable as it was when it was ready to be filled completely.
Remining it because there is assumed decomposition.
Yeah, and being able to remove some of the articles they can remove out of it, and then perhaps reusing a cell partially. I mean, it's like anything else. You're looking for different methods to increase the life.
Well, you know, my in-laws are buried in Germany, and they remine their cemetery plots. So they bury them without caskets. They bury them. They let them rot away, and then those plots are reused. So I can understand that concept to a degree.
Green
So,
burials.
yeah. So
You're not just visiting your relatives, because you're visiting 4 or 5 other people at the same time.
I just thought I'd throw that out there. Give it some lightness. Are there other questions or comments or?
Right, so I was I'll try to speak to both of your points a little bit. So landfills are generally, so as I mentioned, right, landfills are kind of a strange beast. They're a unique property. And one of the things that, going back to your question, is they're generally considered what's known as a wasting asset. So meaning when you're done with it, there really isn't a whole lot of value at the end. You know, once you've finished and closed the landfill, for the most part, there aren't a whole lot of uses for it. It's really a liability, because then you have a multi-year responsibility to monitor it. But in terms of, you know, could you use it for something else? It's pretty limited uses. So for the most part, when a landfill's full and it's done and it's closed, it's considered a wasting asset, and there isn't a whole lot of value.
Understood.
And then, and so, right, to the extent that there's an extended period of time where landfill cells were constructed, they're very expensive to construct, they're filled, and then they were closed. All that, you know, that investment, you know, for using the cost method, it was, you know, in the year that the cell was built, say it cost $20 million to build a cell, your cost method might be 20 million, would go up by $20 million. But to your depreciation point or depletion, as it gets filled, right, say it's a 3-year life, that 20 million is going to go down over 3 years. And then after 3 years, it's going to, you know, the 20 million is essentially gone. Because again, it's a wasting asset. There's not a whole lot of value left at the end. So, and I think this is, you know, speaks to the point of why the cost method, right? How much it costs with the, valuing the property by how much investment you put into it is really problematic for landfills again, because you're gonna get those huge swings. It's gonna go up and then it's gonna come back down. And that's why the market rent or royalty is, how much is this land worth to you to operate a landfill? How much income should I get out of it for a royalty for the value of the land that allows you to operate a landfill business on it? So,
I got
it's a little bit.
So Sanssouci, he's the one, he does the power plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He does power plants and.
Where's his expertise?
It's in public structure like this, period. He does a lot of special use properties, so you catch an old, some sort of an old plant or something. Yeah, he does a lot of things like that, specialty assessments.
So I'm gonna admit, I haven't really read this yet, but I just saw it tonight. What I'm gonna say, he's pretty thorough probably, and he's right on what he feels his numbers should be at for our town.
That's why you would want to hire someone who's confident in their answer, yes.
So if we've been 15 or more years without doing an appraisal from the 10 million, I'm just throwing out that maybe Casella needs to get us that appraisal so we know where we're at dollar to dollar. Then if we come to an agreement, if it's much lesser than what Sanssouci says, maybe if it's based on the structure of what's this year and permits and what they're doing next year, that every year they give an appraisal. Some years it might be higher, some years it might be lower. I don't know, I'm just throwing ideas out there. But I don't think we can, what are we negotiating tonight if we don't have what their final dollar is?
Well, if it's okay if I.
Yeah,
I think
Yes.
it's a really fair point. We're throwing a lot of really complex information out there, stuff that we've spent a lot of time with. You all are just hearing it for the first time. And we recognize that, and we understand too that this process in some ways for Casella may be a procedural necessity, so that we can have a discussion with the town at a separate level. And I can tell you that we're already having discussions with the town's council about that. And when I say that, I mean I hope it will be a very productive way, because I think if I didn't mention this before, Casella really values its relationship with the town. I'm not saying that because I'm paid to, and I'm not saying that because you fed me really delicious sandwiches. It really does, and that was something that was made clear to me the minute I stepped in to work with them. And they want to come to a resolution that works. This is, a disagreement, and we're going to work our way through it. But it has no effect on the host community agreement that Casella has with the town. That's an entirely separate thing. These are the property taxes that the town is effectively collecting for the state of Vermont. So with that said, I don't want the board to feel like, it's under pressure to have the final say in this discussion.
What I'm feeling is that you're much lower than where we're at. So I think I personally need to see where this comes from, where we got $30 million difference here. And Carrie was going to ask, but she didn't want yet. So the properties that you have besides the landfill, the houses around, are those separate from this? Are they
They're
based
part of
in
this
this?
assessment. They're
Yeah.
part of this assessment.
Okay.
The part of the assessment, are they part of the appeal?
Yes.
Okay,
absolutely,
okay.
absolutely.
Because the whole parcel.
Because they're not really part, they're not the land.
Oh, they're a contiguous parcel that's all owned by in common ownership.
Right.
So this 52 million is the 148 acres that has an office, a methane plant.
Not the methane plant. The methane plant is
Yeah,
owned by
that's
Washington.
owned by
That's
Washington
what they're
Electric.
on. So, but it's got buildings on,
A few. It's
so
most of them.
there's garages, there's houses.
There's 7 houses, I believe.
Yeah, and in full disclosure, one of those houses actually increased in value this year based on the completion of an under construction credit as well. So our assessment on this property last year was actually slightly lower than it is for this year based on one of those dwellings being improved.
Was that the Petrie place?
It was, yeah, you put the cards away here. It's a house that's, and I'm forgetting the name of
Larry.
the
The ranch
road.
house they just.
Yeah,
fixed
the
up.
ranch. It's like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
grayish colored
Yeah.
home right in there. Yeah.
You know, not to, certainly I never seek to minimize what this board does. Yeah, I've been here a couple times. You do a great job. But the intention here is to move the appeal along. They have to go through the process. They have to appeal before the BCA. And I know you feel like you're kind of not giving anything. It's just the way it's going to end up being. It's going to get negotiated out by the Board of Selectmen
Well, that's what I think it's gonna
yeah,
have to be
exactly.
negotiated.
Because we're not going to see a value tonight.
No.
No.
You're not going to see one, 10 days or 15 days from now, I don't think. The idea is to move the appeal along so that they can make proper filing in Superior Court and to be in mediation.
Connor, in your presentation, I think you were alluding that in this valuation, you think maybe the personal property, equipment and whatever is included in this, basically the going concern,
Yeah,
as opposed to the real estate and its structures thereon.
that's right, yeah.
Do you know, Bill, if that's true?
That's their opinion, absolutely.
But you don't know if Skip would have had to go,
I-
because one of his things was an income valuation. That was the biggest part, right?
Yes, it is.
So the income valuation, to me, sounds like the going concern of a business as well as the structures and the real estate, the hard assets that are on the ground.
I understand that. I believe that Skip made an allowance for what he feels was that business interest. And there's a disagreement here that he did not, in fact, make that. Plus, he did not use the proper income stream to begin with in their opinion.
No, I'm trying to relate to businesses I've had, going back to my senior care facility that we have. Let's say it's worth $1 million. If we were to sell it, the real estate is 300,000.
Right.
The 700,000 is the going concern. It's the employees, it's the clientele and the permits and the structures that we have.
It's why as an appraiser, you try hard. I always use the example of if I bought a tennis club. The real estate is worth less than the membership list is. That's a good example of it.
Mhm.
But in other cases, when I don't have a rent like we have for a building, I have to use a different income stream. And the selection of that stream and selecting it properly so that it doesn't include the value of the business is why great appraisers get paid great money.
The other reason I can compare my business to the landfill is that there are a limited number of senior daycare facilities in the state of Vermont, and it's regulated.
Yes.
And it's preventative from new ones starting up.
Mhm.
So that builds a premium into the business.
Yes, it does.
And looking at a landfill, it's even more restrictive in a new startup. What's it take, 11 years or something to get one going is some number that I heard, but it takes years to get one going. It's a lot of permitting. It's all sort of customer relations. It's not in my backyard and all of that, but here we've got an existing. So it is a premium piece of real estate in that regard. But how's our time? Okay, so our time is up.
Oh, I had a question. Nobody.
If you're quick.
Yeah, I know if it's a question.
All right.
It sounds like the landfills are so unique that they can't be compared with other landfills. Like the one we had earlier, we compared this house, this house, this house, this house. Is that the situation with landfills? They're all so unique, you can't compare them to other similar landfills? So that you would have.
You probably could, but the comment was made by Connor. First of all, good luck finding landfill sales. When it sells, you'll see a company that might own, a trucking end of it and a landfill end of it. Everything. So how do I separate out of that sale price what the landfill was worth? Be very, very hard to find it. If you could find landfill sales, I'm sure you could by looking at capacity, what was left and stuff. You could do a comparative. Well, you don't have sales based to even attempt it.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
So I need to again ask for 3 BCA members to form an inspection committee, to form an on-site review of the property, and their report will need to be presented to the board within 30 days of this hearing. Do I have some volunteers?
And actually, for this one, we'll probably open it up to the whole board because of it being a very big percentage of our grant list. I think the most of us who can be there would probably be more beneficial.
Okay, so who wants to be on this committee?
I guess she just elected all of us. She just elected all of us, is what I heard.
You could exclude yourself if you would like, sure.
No, I've been out of Casellas for 10 or more years now, I'm fine.
It's not gonna be August 11th, is it?
No.
Jared?
I was gonna say August 11th, there's 3 of us that definitely won't be available.
We got a month, she said?
So are we all good with this?
Depends on the date. We
Yeah.
gotta, you know, my
Okay.
calendar is not full, but it
It'll
does
be,
have
I
dates.
think it'd certainly be a good learning experience for us anyhow.
Mhm.
I
Mondays
know
and
they'll
Tuesdays
really
are back.
enjoy giving you the tour too. I actually got one the last time we were up here and it was really, really great.
Would you have any objection if I also went?
I don't think so.
I'd like to see.
Okay, so we need to establish a time
And a date.
and a date.
Preferably if we could look at either a Monday or Thursday when I am here
Mondays
at
and
the
Tuesdays are bad for
office.
me. Thursdays are good.
Thursday, so if we can try to target a Thursday.
Yeah,
It's the 18th when we're in
The
Marshall.
13th is, the 18th is we're in Marshfield for BCA hearings. That's right.
What's that?
we do have,
Andy is representing a client in the
25th?
town we're in on the 18th.
Oh,
for a
that
BCA
doesn't give
hearing.
us a lot of time if we're talking 30 days to have a 12
Can we
or
extend
the
the
11th?
11th?
No, the 11th is not good for me. But that, when, do you have restrictions on days if it's a Thursday?
I don't, I guess I don't have an outlet now. I wouldn't say like Thursdays are in particular bad or.
Thursdays in general are not a problem for me, except I just mentioned, I think Bill and I, the 18th, we are both in Marshfield for a BCA hearing.
So do we want to piggyback this one after the cutting?
Same thing.
Yeah,
I'm out of
I'm
town,
not
so
in favor of that.
I won't be there.
So you're saying the
I'm tied
11th?
up on
so maybe do the 11th. You got that
So
one
if
at
we're here
9.
9 o'clock, how long will we be there?
I would say maybe, yeah, give an hour, so maybe 10:30.
Well,
I'm
yeah,
not
they can
available
have-
on the 11th.
What's that?
The 11th isn't good for me.
No,
Me neither.
Me neither.
really?
Yep.
Okay, then it won't be that one.
So the 6th to
And we've
the-
got the 18th.
6th to the 13th.
Well, how many can do a Monday? Somebody mentioned Mondays.
Any other day?
How many can do a Monday?
I can't.
And what day?
Monday, what?
I'm good every Monday except the 8th.
I'm the least important person in this process, but I'm pretty much unavailable Mondays or Thursdays, either the week of the 8th or the 15th. So the week of the 22nd is the earliest that but I don't even know that Casella will necessarily.
The Friday work?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Working
Yeah,
Fridays?
yeah.
What's Fridays?
Fridays
But-
would work.
Does Fridays work?
Starting the week of the 22nd for me, but again,
The starting then is okay for you?
yeah, that's when I'm gonna be gone the week of the 5th. Wait, I'm sorry, Friday the 19th would work for me, actually. I'll be back by then.
I think, yeah, that week we should be able to make that work.
19th, everybody?
I'm just
If
checking.
I
Sure.
can just make a comment, technically, they're supposed to look at all those houses too. So
Yes, it's gonna be
you're gonna have to
everything.
Get permission or whatever for inspections on them. I know it's a pain in the rear end,
Yeah,
but
okay.
technically, the board's supposed to see
Yeah.
everything.
Thanks.
And that's what we would be
I'm sorry.
requesting.
I'm sorry. You better be.
That's
prepared to
okay.
Spend a good 3-4 hours.
Yeah.
So are people gonna be home? Would it have to be a weekend?
They're gonna
Do you
make-
have-
they're gonna make those arrangements. They're the
Yeah.
landlord.
Yeah,
How many of the houses have some people in?
So we're talking about the 19th. Does that not work for anybody?
What time?
Which, the night, what date you say?
19th.
Yeah, that's good for me.
As long as I can do 10:30 or after.
Okay, well,
So we'll shoot for 10:30.
It's gonna take 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
You said? So what time do we start?
9:30.
9:30.
So August 19th at, no, 10:30. Yeah,
You send us an email, right?
yes.
10:30
All right.
inspection.
I will.
Meeting,
Yes.
and will you work out the details of where we're meeting? You
Yep.
Put it out to us?
Yep.
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
I think the policy is an inspection.
Oh, that's true.
Ends the process.
Yeah, because we're gonna have.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Transportation.
Are we all set?
That's logistically, yeah.
Can I ask, what are you doing on Narrows Farm? What you doing while they're every, what's going on at your place? We're
God,
gonna put all the dirt.
I wish so, I mean, it's such a huge operation and I had probably as many questions as you did when I went up to see it. I mean, there's a lot going on there.
Can I just
They have a solar
interrupt you?
farm, they have a vegetable farm. We just.
This is a personal issue between you and her. We
No, I
just,
wondered what's
I know,
going
but
on
you,
with all the
no,
dirt.
you can talk to him after. We,
Oh, you
I'd
want
like
to
to.
go, Richard?
I'm going to pull this meeting into order.
Yeah, please.
So at this point now, we need to also determine the date to reconvene for this and the other
For
hearing.
cuttings. Yeah,
And it's got to be within 30 days from now. Is that right?
no, it's gonna be within, oh God, I gotta check. I got my thing. I think it's within
Maybe
14.
a little later in the day, or I don't know who's gonna be to attend, but just, a lot of the folks from the home office, it's a good.
For the inspection?
3-hour drive, yeah. We
You
can
want-
make 10:30 work, but if it was 11:30, it's a little easier.
That's fine.
You can always have someone else from Casella there
Yeah.
to just, because they're just inspecting and just looking through it. You'd probably almost be better off with a maintenance sort of.
Yeah, so leave it as is, leave it
Okay.
kind of as is, and roll it out. It's fine.
We are not supposed to be gaining new information at that. We're basically
We're
doing
just
the
visually
tour.
looking.
The reason it's a little, I mean, I think that we're swimming a little bit on this is because when we were here last time, we both went up to tour the property and we hopped in a vehicle with, I forgot. what this guy's- Great, wonderful guy. He drove us around, but we had to go in one vehicle. There are a number of other vehicles going back and forth, because there's an operation up there. So I don't know that, if we're gonna be carpooling in one or two vehicles, that might be driven by Casella folks, that might be the optimal way to do it. But I just,
Hire a short
yeah.
school bus?
Well-
If there's trucks up there, I'll bow out of that. I don't want to cause a problem.
Well, I was gonna say, like, on their
More work
open
than
house
they go.
days, they do
We're fitting
contract
10,
out
we
to a
can fit
bus
11.
okay.
that goes and carries you everywhere, going throughout. So if maybe they can do something similar as well,
Yeah.
and then we can just all jump in right on that bus and then just go through all the different
Prior
properties.
to the 2021 appraisal too, David Barlow and I were actually both in there. Harding and Carbone was there, then Jeremy was one of your engineers up there.
Oh, sure.
And we just kind of like skipped, Sansucci was with us, we just jumped in his car, we followed them up in a truck up in there is how we did it. We all met down at the office first, we kind of had a powwow in there, and we kind of just had a caravan that we just kind of took around.
And that may be the way we do it. I just don't want to presume that I know how they
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
That's okay.
And that's fine. Yep,
It can be arranged with Deb and
Okay.
between.
yep.
So we need a follow-up meeting.
I would say if we can possibly try to target for the end of August.
'30th and the 30th is out for me.
It is for me also. The week before that, I'm fine, but the 20, starting with the 27th, 28th, my wife and I are off to, I don't know.
Wherever she wants.
Exactly.
I'm good that week of the 22nd.
Do the appellants and assessor both need to be in attendance at the reconvened meeting?
No, you do not.
Okay.
No,
In my experience, there was one meeting, there may have been an inspection, and there was a decision.
yeah.
Um,
The only thing that may benefit is while we do the inspection, we cannot ask you questions, but we can think of items. And then when we come back to reconvene, we could always ask you questions if you are here to
Okay.
further clarify some items. You are not required to be here. The process will still continue in its normal means. That's the only advantage, is if somebody did have any questions,
Sure.
you'd be here to be able to answer them. Otherwise, it'd be, like you said, you're gonna come, we're gonna present to you what our inspection report is. There'll be a little bit of time for be able to ask questions, and then technically, we're gonna go into deliberative session. And we're gonna come out basically not really making a judgment. It's gonna be, we are gonna go ahead and send you our letter,
Right,
and you'll find out within
Okay.
the letter.
thank you.
Yep.
So, meeting. You got a choice there, Deb? A Thursday's generally good,
It's fine with me.
29th
The 29th of what?
of September.
September.
Oh, no, not
You said
September,
you had
August.
That'd be August. That'd be August.
Oh, yeah, I jumped ahead.
Yeah, just a little bit.
You do the 29th of August.
The
it's just a
29th of
Monday.
August is a Monday. That works for me.
That works for me.
Okay.
How does that work for you folks?
Just to say,
Being a Monday?
I will be
If-
vacation.
Okay,
But, yeah, so I guess, on going back to the question point, right, if we, you know, if you want to, if we want to be available by phone.
Yep.
If,
and that's absolutely,
yeah,
that's a capability.
okay, I just wanted to, if that would be okay.
Yep,
Either way,
absolutely.
though, I wouldn't be able to do it that week.
Okay,
But,
so we should probably accommodate to make sure.
And I won't be.
So the August 29th does not work for
it
you.
does not work for us. I may not be needed, but just in case you have questions and you'd like to, speak with us, probably best to schedule some time when we would be available. in
yep.
theory, So.
The 22nd is too early,
Oh, God,
probably.
yeah.
So 25th or the 26th, if we're trying to keep it in August.
Which we should.
And Thursday, 25th, Thursday of August,
Works with you too.
that works.
But wasn't, are you going?
No, the 25th works for me.
Okay, and the 25th works for you?
Yeah, although the day before would be even better, 24th.
24th does not work for me.
Could always come by phone.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, let's, 25th.
Okay, so I'll do 8:25. It'll be 5:30. That time works, or 6 or 5. or-
Whatever's convenient for people. And will you send a notice around?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
5:30 work, Andy?
That's great, thank you.
Okay. That's the 25th, a Thursday.
All right. I believe that covers it. We will recess this hearing to the date of August 19th for inspection, followed up with the 8:25 follow-up meeting. Thank you for your participation. Does the BCA board feel that a deliberative session is in accordance with 1 VSA 312E necessary at this time?
Nope.
If not, in the meantime, I ask you please review all the information that's been presented to this board today until the next meeting. I remind all inspection committee and appellants that the on-site visits are not opportunities for us to gather more evidence, but for us to have an understanding of the facility and how it functions. No additional information can be given to the inspection committee, and no discussion of this hearing or the upcoming hearing can be had. If you want to present additional information to the board, you may do so at the reconvene date that's been set up.
So this hearing has been reconvened
You done?
for this hearing. Yeah, not the meeting.
We're done the hearing.
It's the gavel.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Now, there's some additional sandwiches